You should listen to obey. Tasma' tuti' al-amir. You should listen to obey your leader, even if he's an Abyssinian slave whose head is like as dark as a raisin.
Yeah. So of course,
so some of them have a problem with that.
Yeah. So of course, like I'm not being funny, but when I first heard that, I was like, "Well, what does that mean?" I heard they came to Ireland and took some of my people.
Okay. If you deal with that's the Barbary trade. It was under the Barbary piracy. There was a lot of piracy in the 16th, 17th century along the Barbary coast, which is kind of like northern Algerian and sort of southern Mediterranean coastal regions, and then sort of northern Algerian coast, sort of Barbary, because that's known as like the Barbary coast. And
so they actually came to Ireland.
Yeah, but those people were corsairs, John. They were not necessarily people who like doing it like based upon sort of like Islam or anything like that. They're kind of like pirates.
Yeah.
Or there was a famous thing he said after the riots where he said something along the lines, "Oh, the chavs have become black. The whites have become black, and they've adopted this culture which is intruded upon us, which is wholly false." And even in that, you see what I'm saying? They made another statement recently where, there's so many damn blacks. Slavery wasn't genocide because there's so many damn blacks. There's so many damn blacks in Africa and Britain, aren't there? And an awful lot of them survived.
إنك لا تهدي من أحببت ولكن الله يهدي من يشاء.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi, it's John Fontain. Just before we begin the podcast, please make sure you click subscribe and also set your notifications. And make sure you check out the earlier podcasts. We've up to around 40 podcasts so far. There's lots of podcasts there for you to benefit from. Make sure you check that out. Also, if you can go to the John Fontain YouTube channel as well, click subscribe, set your notifications, and also enjoy the other videos. There's a Fiqh of Love series, a series on Christianity, and other videos regarding Dawah. Also, if you would like to support the podcast by supporting us financially with the equipment and the travel costs and the running costs, not just of the podcast, but also the other Dawah activities I'm involved in, please support on the Patreon account. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah. Welcome to the Young Smirks podcast. I'm here with a very special guest, Abdul Haq Ashanti. Assalamu alaikum, bro.
Wa alaikum salam.
How are you doing?
Alhamdulillah.
MashaAllah, you're a historian, author, and mashallah, you do lots of writing and also translation. How are you doing?
Alhamdulillah. I would say I'm not really a historian. I'd say that's one of my fields of expertise, especially with regards to Africa and Islam, history of Islam in Africa. But I think mashallah, you've put me above my rank. I wouldn't say that I'm a historian per se.
Okay. Alhamdulillah. You know, you're actually a convert or revert to Islam. You were not born you're not born as a Muslim.
No.
How did you find Islam?
Yeah. Bismillah. Inna alhamdulillah. نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا من سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. So I've been Muslim for around 25 years. I became Muslim when I was quite young, so 17. But I first heard about Islam or knew about Islam when I was born and raised in Oxford. Originally in an estate called the Blackbird Leys Estate, was where I was raised as well, which is in Oxford. And then I lived in the city centre part of Oxford. So I'm from Oxford, and I'd say when I was around 15 years of age, so in 1992, that's when my cousin and some of his friends at the time, they became Muslim. And that was probably the first time that I had proper, interaction with Islam at that point. And at that particular time, I wouldn't say that I wasn't always, let's just say, a good boy at that particular time.
I mean,
so that particular time, was something which I appreciated, the fact that my cousin and his friends at the time, what I appreciated was that they were kind of taking time out to speak to us and to engage us with regards to what Islam is.
Yeah.
And I was raised as a Christian.
But how bad can Oxford be, bro? I mean,
well, at that particular time, but that's what people don't be deceived by the by the prestigious history of Oxford. It also has another side of it, which anyone who's from Oxford, and especially the more urban parts of Oxford, will know. There's a few estates and stuff like that. There were actually riots in 1992. There was a lot of what was called hotters at the time, or joyriding. That was really big. Yeah, probably, in fact, Oxford was probably one of the places which put that on the map at that particular time. So it was, at that time there was some estates, man, which were quite notorious at the time and still are. But that's that particular estate. I was raised as a Christian there. I used to go to church, particular church there as well. But I can remember when I was young, I never sort of had the notion that believed that Jesus was God per se. I'm always sort of what I liked about going to church when I was young was that they'd hear about the stories of the prophets, and I think that was something which stayed with me. So when I first heard about Islam, I didn't find any contradiction whatsoever between what my cousin and his friends at the time were telling me and what I already believed. So that was something which, and then so that was, I'll say, the theological and creedal aspect side of it, and then on the social side of it, I appreciated how that they were taking time to actually engage myself as a young person and take the time to speak to me and try and give me some guidance at the time. So that was something I'd say which really I appreciated.
Now, Ashanti, is this connected with the Ashanti tribe?
Yes, it is. Yeah. So I use it to my name as an ascription because it's a well-known tribe. From Ghana.
Do you have links with that tribe?
That's where my ancestors are from originally. Originally from Ashantis.
Because obviously there's a lot of Muslims also in Ghana. Not particularly the Ashanti tribe, but there are many Ashantis that have embraced Islam.
Well, even the original Ashantis in the past, the Ashanti chiefs of the past, in their courts they had many Muslims among the Ashanti. So they did actually have that. And I know the British, when there were a number of wars between the Ashanti and the British in the 18th and 19th centuries. There was like the first Anglo-Ashanti war, which the Ashanti won. Then there was the second Anglo-Ashanti one. Then there was a third Anglo-Ashanti war. And then the third Anglo-Ashanti war, when the British went into the Ashanti court, they were actually impressed by the literature which they found in the libraries which they found in the Ashanti court. I think most of those books probably would have been in a lot of those books would have been in Arabic. Due to, as I said, there were Muslims who were involved in the administration of the Ashanti.
And of course, close links with the Hausa and the
Fulani. Exactly, Hausa tribes. There are many other tribes actually in Ghana. In Ghana, there are in fact many languages spoken. So there are other tribes, Hausa, Kotakoli, and so forth. So loads of
and Muslim tribes.
Those are the Muslim tribes.
SubhanAllah, it's fascinating history. Of course, I have a particular love for Africa. That's where I found Islam. And today I wanted to actually speak about your new publication, Defining Legends. What inspired you to actually write on this topic? What is the topic?
I actually originally wrote that book in, I'd say, the first, proto version of the book was in like 1999, and it was only about 75 pages at the time. And what the intent of the book was, so it wasn't actually published. So at that time, it wasn't actually published. I just used to print it off myself, and distribute it, and sell it myself. But then since sort of the late 90s, I've been adding extra aspects to it, and now it's become a 400-page book over the course of that time. But what spurred me to write the book is when I became Muslim, and then I started to read again, and then I went back into education again at that time. And then when I started to read a lot to do with, I used to love reading books about history, African history. Black history. However, some of the literature which I used to read at the time, I'd found elements of it, or some particular authors were quite anti-Islam, especially they were anti-Islam as it relates to sort of the African continent and black people and so forth. And I'll say that's what spurred me to then delve further, to look further. What's the veracity and validity of what they're saying here? So some of the things they would say, for instance, John, was stuff like, Islam is not it was spread by the sword in Africa. It was forced into Africa. It was, they forced the African people to accept Islam. Arabs came in and forced the local Africans to accept Islam. It's a religion which destroyed the indigenous cultures from everywhere it went, and so forth. This kind of narrative. So that's what led me to delve in further. I think what I would say, firstly, about that particular narrative, it's kind of the same kind of Eurocentric narrative, essentially.
But where is it coming from? Is it coming from Africans? Is it coming from...
Yeah, exactly. So there are some people...
It's like Black Orientalists.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Black Orientalism. Yeah, I think some historians... I think there's a historian called Sherman Jackson who refers to it as Black Orientalism. He coined it as being Black Orientalism. But before that, I was referred to it as being sort of that, like an Afrocentric kind of narrative. Yeah. And there are people who I could say exemplify that narrative. Of writers like Chancellor Williams, a famous book he wrote called The Destruction of Black Civilization. And the cover itself, the cover of the book itself is actually based upon sort of, we could say, Eurocentric stereotypes of both Arabs and blacks anyway. I think it depicts an Arab on a sword fighting, an Arab with a sword on horseback, fighting an African with a spear, just in leopard skin. I mean, so the cover itself is kind of stereotypical anyway. So he's one. Other people like John Henrik Clarke is another. And they kind of, you could say, represent that kind of narrative.
But what was the intention behind this?
It seems to me that due to the rapid growth of Islam among black communities, I think that's what really...
particularly in the States.
Yeah, definitely in America and in the West. I think that was what troubled them. And as a result of that, then they then sought to discredit, you could say, Islam. Not just those two, there are others as well. Other more contemporary ones, again, ignoramuses really, they're not really specialized.
But would these have been like Christian based or?
Well, Chancellor Williams, good, yeah. Chancellor Williams, in his case, he was an avid Christian. He actually mentions this in his book, so that could be something which, you see what I'm saying, also inspired his authorship of that book. Whereas John Henrik Clarke and others who follow his trend, they're more atheists. And they actually try to claim that the Abrahamic faiths actually originate in ancient Egypt with the pharaoh Akhenaten, which is kind of what they say, which again is complete falsehood, because Akhenaten, the Egyptian pharaoh, he himself later declared himself to be a god. So how can he himself have then brought monotheism to the people? You see what I'm saying?
So what are some of the topics? How do you kind of address this narrative and kind of answer it?
Yeah, good. So first I look at if does Islam actually teach racism? What does Islam say about this? You know what the Quran says? Allah says in the Quran, وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ خَلْقَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَاخْتِلَافِ أَلْسِنَتِكُمْ وَأَلْوَانِكُمْ إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لِآيَاتٍ لِلْعَالَمِينَ. Allah says, from his signs is that he created the heavens and the earth, and the difference between your languages and your colours indeed are signs in that for the worlds. That's what Allah says. And also we know that Allah says, "In akramakum indallahi atqakum." That indeed that the nobler of you in the sight of Allah is the one who is the most pious. And Allah also mentions that He created the peoples into nations and tribes. Why? لِتَعَارَفُوا, that they would get to know each other.
So it's like in a positive.
Yes, and also the Prophet himself said. The Prophet said in the Hadith, بعثت إلى كل أسود وأحمر. I was sent. بعثت إلى كل أسود وأحمر. I was sent to the red and the black. So the Prophet he mentions, meaning he was sent to everyone. So this shows the universality of Islam.
There's not kind of any kind of superiority of race, or
definitely not. Some people try to use. I've seen this in some of the Christian evangelicalist preachers. They try to use certain hadith out of context to try to say, "Oh, see, look at this statement. This is a racist statement." Well, not really. First of all, you have to understand particular statements in in their context and what the Prophet ﷺ was trying to emphasize with that. Sometimes certain phrases are used in Arabic as an emphasis, extra emphasis on a matter. And I think this is what some people don't understand.
You know, just on that point, I want to ask you actually, because there's a hadith, a couple of brothers have actually asked me about a particular hadith, a couple of black brothers. And of course, if you don't know the context of something, you know the hadith regarding following your leader, even if he is like a black man, or I forget.
And even if that you should listen to obey, you should listen to obey your leader, even if he's an Abyssinian slave whose head is like as dark as a raisin. Yeah.
So of course,
so some of them have a problem with that.
Yeah. So of course, like, I mean, I'm not being funny, but when I first heard that, I was like, well, what does that mean? It's like, but people kind of using these out of context and just kind of like, I'm trying to open the discussion about, if people hear these things, to not have doubts, go and seek the knowledge and seek the true understanding. So I mean, regarding this particular hadith, what's the type of context?
Because the context with that is, as I mentioned, that was actually the hadith in question, is that the Prophet he's mentioned that as an emphasis, as increased emphasis, and he was saying that to people who they would probably look down upon people who had that kind of description. But with that, the Prophet said no, even if the person has an appearance as that. And is not even of the same race as you. If he's your ruler, you still have to hear and obey him.
I guess it's also showing that somebody from that background could also be a leader.
Yes, definitely.
It's a big,
and that's why we find that. This is why. This is a good point, actually, John. What we give this issue here, because sometimes some of the Christian missionaries and evangelicals, and I actually did a discussion with a Christian missionary on this a few years back, and what his line of thought was, oh, but in the Muslim world, you never had an abolitionist movement. But what my contention is to that, what we say to it is that, well, maybe in the Muslim world didn't have an abolitionist movement because maybe that wasn't needed. Why? Because already within Islam, there was already adequate recourse for someone to gain freedom. So that's the first thing. There was adequate, and there was also a meritocracy within Islam. So even if someone came from a slave background, they could still go work themselves up in society, and that's what happened in Islamic history. And this is something which you don't really find definitely didn't happen in the transatlantic slave context. So that's probably why. You know what I'm saying? That's probably why many people they have difficulty understanding that.
I mean, of course, like the actual definition of slavery as well are two different things. Transatlantic slavery is very different to the slavery what was kind of a reality at the time, and Islam aimed to govern an existing reality. It didn't invent slavery, as the Orientalists have you believe. It was governing an existing reality of the time.
Yes.
And how do you govern that reality?
That's what most of the scholars say, John. Most of the scholars, like one of the scholars, one of our teachers from Jordan, Sheikh Mashur Hassan, he mentioned that Islam is not pleased with slavery. But Islam existed at a time when slavery was already established. But Islam is not pleased with it. Henceforth, this is why setting free, in the Quran mentions, to the freeing of a slave. That's why something is a meritorious deed, a very noble action for the people to free the slave. This is why the early Muslims, the Sahaba, that's why they freed hundreds of slaves, thousands of slaves. It's recorded, documented in history. I mentioned that in the book. One of the scholars from India, Sadiq Hassan Khan, he mentions this. He actually mentions the numbers of the companions of the Prophet who freed slaves. So this is something which Islam encourages. And I think that this is something which it's a stumbling block from other people from other traditions. But I don't really feel that they really kind of understand.
And it wasn't something based on race as such. If you read about the history in Islam of slavery, you had Arabs who were enslaved. You had Salman al-Farsi as an example.
Exactly. And there's even a hadith where the hadith it says, لونه أحمر كأنه مملوك أو كأنه عبيد. That his skin was red as if he was a slave. So and then the scholars commentating upon this. I think it's mentioned in the book from Ibn Hajar. They says red as if he was a slave means that he was of the other maybe of another nation, meaning like of the Persians or of the Romans, for example, because they were people who at that particular time were also people who was taken into slavery. That's why in Islamic history, slaves were white, black, all colours.
It wasn't based on race supremacy.
No, it wasn't based upon a racial supremacy. Although we could say that, unfortunately, there were some instances in Islam which may have led to parts of Africa being seen as a kind of as a resource and a reserve for slaves. Could say that happened. That did happen in Islamic history. But when that did happen, however, this wasn't something which Islam was happy with. It's something which happened within certain Muslim societies, as opposed to that is something which, you know what I'm saying? So there's a difference.
Yeah, we're making that distinction between what Islam teaches, the guidance of the Prophet ﷺ and the early generations, and of course, we know that Muslims as people, as human beings, were not perfect in implementing that over the history.
Yeah,
you know, that at certain points in history, I'm sure we can maybe mention some of these points in history sometime in this podcast, you know, where kind of Islamic civilizations did the slavery wrong, you know, but we need to make that distinction that's not, it was clearly against Islam and refuted by the scholars of the time and things like that.
Excellent point. So that did happen. That did happen. Let's look at, first of all, like how did Islam or how did the early Muslims regard Africa? So that's really important. There's something obviously which you know this is something mentioned in the Quran, Ashab al-Fil, which refers to Abraha, who was from Ethiopia, and the Ethiopians at the time were actually like they were an empire. So they were who were trying to an expansionist empire. They actually tried to expand into southern Yemen, and then try to get encroach into the Arabian Peninsula. This is something which we know is historical facts which happened. And I think again that's something which some people that's something again maybe it's difficult for some people to also comprehend, that there was actually an African empire which was actually had a kind of an imperial aspect to it as well.
And he tried to conquer Mecca.
Yeah, exactly. and it mentioned the Quran. There's the story of the companions of the elephant. That's mentioned, and some historians have actually also noted that due to the destruction of Ashab al-Fil in Mecca, then after that could have set in some anti-Ethiopian prejudice among the Arabs. This is mentioned by one of the historians called Jawad Ali, who I quoted in a book, who also he gives a really excellent explanation with regards to issues of blackness among the Arabs and so forth, which we can get to that. But even after that, during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, when the Muslims were being persecuted, Prophet ﷺ, he advised the first Muslims to migrate to where? He advised them to migrate to Africa, to Habasha. Why? Because he said there's a just king, he doesn't oppress anyone. Najashi. And that's where the Muslims found safe haven. So the first Muslims sought safe haven in Africa. So if the Islam had a problem with black people, Islam had a problem with Africa. The Africa was key in terms of the aiding Islam, especially in the original dispensation.
The first hijrah to
exactly. So that's something as well, which again is disregarded. On the other hand, by those anti-Islamic, Afrocentric, and Black Orientalist writers. You know what I'm saying?
And this is well documented.
Well documented.
Not just in Islamic literature as well. This is documented. The history of the kingdom within what's modern in Yemen.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Furthermore to that is that when the first, and this is a story, this is mentioned by some of the historians like Ibn Abdul Hakam, who authored the book Futuh al-Misr, the conquest of Egypt. This is important, and that was written about maybe 200 years after the event. Ibn Abdul Hakam, and he mentions the story of when Amr ibn al-As and the Sahaba, when they went into Egypt. In Egypt at the time was being ruled by the Byzantine Empire. They were the ones ruling Egypt at the time, and what the stories say at the time is that they were actually oppressing the indigenous people of Egypt at the time. When the Muslims came there, they actually wanted the Muslims to come in. And I think there was even one Christian priest or Christian monk from Alexandria who had been banished, and then when the Muslims came in, he was actually allowed to return. And the same that he as well. He used to actually pray for the Muslims to have more dominance in North Africa. But when the Muslims went into Egypt,
people forget that there's a lot of fitna between the Christian sects at the time.
Definitely.
And arguably, Islam actually allowed some of these to survive.
Yes, true. And particularly like the Coptic, the Copts in particular. They also had issues with the time of the other churches, which were more affiliated to, you could say, the Greek Orthodox Church and so forth at the time. But when a delegation of the companions of the Prophet Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they went to speak to the leader of Egypt at the time, who was called Muqawqis. So the Muslims, the Sahaba, put forward Ubadah ibn as-Samit, radiallahu anhu. Ubadah ibn as-Samit. He was an Arab, but the depiction of him mentioned the sources that they say he was black. So he was a black Arab. Is what's mentioned. And when he approached Muqawqis, what did Muqawqis say to him? Muqawqis said, "Get this black man away from me." So this is what he said: "Get this black man away from me." And then as the conversation between Ubadah and Muqawqis continues, Ubadah says, as for you being, and the Sahaba mentioned, no, we put him to lead the delegation because he's the one who preceded us in Islam. He is the best among us in terms of his religion, best among us in terms of his manners, and blackness isn't something which is a problem for us. And then as the conversation continued between Ubadah and Muqawqis, Ubadah radiallahu anhu says to Muqawqis, as for you being scared of me, then I have 1,000 of our men who are waiting at the borders, and they're blacker than me and more ferocious than me. So this shows. So there's a lot of things we can pick out from this. First of all, it shows that Islam was a meritocracy. That regardless of one's race or background, one could still achieve, leadership. Also shows that, and this is important as well, is that there was evidently that there were black people involved in the original spread of Islam. It also shows as well, and this is important for some of the anti-Islamic Afrocentric writers, is that Egypt wasn't ruled by black Egyptians from the Nile Valley civilizations. It wasn't being ruled by them or by the followers of Imhotep. By that time, Egypt at that time was being run by the Byzantines and who were mostly from Europe. In fact, Muqawqis, some of the historians mention that Muqawqis, that name itself, comes from the Latin or Greek word Pekaukasos, which means Caucasian, meaning that it was probably someone who was originally from Europe. So these were the people who ruled Egypt. It was how it's sometimes framed is that the people who were ruling Egypt at the time of the Islamic conquest were the descendants of the black Egyptians from the Nile Valley. And it wasn't the case. So it's like a bit of a historical error which sometimes some people commit at the time. It also shows that it was the Muslims, in fact, who were re-emphasizing this respect and this toleration, regardless of color, and also emphasizing that they had no problem with the blackness. And in fact, they mentioned the blackness.
It's fascinating.
You see what I'm saying? So it's something which is really important. Furthermore, for that is that there was no wholesale, from the first ones, there was no wholesale invasion of Black Africa by the first Muslims. There were some skirmishes. There was something known as the Battle of Dongola, which probably took place where like Sudan is now. But interestingly, in that the people of the Nubians, they're from Nubia. So interestingly, there's a few interesting facts about this. SubhanAllah, that there were some skirmishes. There was no like wholesale like attack or penetration of that. And in fact, that they say that the Nubians they're actually very good fighters at the time. So there was a treaty. There were some treaties. Called the Treaty of Bangala. So it was a treaty between the Nubians and the Muslims. And subhanAllah, and then what happened centuries later? Then Nubia now is Islamic. It's a Muslim. They're Muslims now. that particular part of the world.
Yeah.
So subhanallah. So there was no wholesale in terms of the spread of Islam. That didn't actually happen into Black Africa per se. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That happened in North Africa.
Not as like an official from the empire.
Yes, yeah.
Like it was more like a trade, quite an organic.
Yes.
Entrance.
That's how Islam spread.
Yeah.
Like if we're talking about in the 10th century, that's how Islam spread. But in terms of like we're talking earlier, there was in terms of battles that more took place in North Africa per se. You see what I'm saying? That happened, and there was in Algeria there was a female warrior who's referred to as she's referred to in the Islamic sources as al-kahina, like a sorceress. You see what I'm saying? Who was the leader, one of the people fighting against the Muslims. But then eventually the Berbers, they because there was a lot of corruption among what was happening, they then actually left, sort of like defected en masse, to become Muslim. You know what I'm saying? So that's how Islam spread.
Yeah.
But it didn't happen like in terms of in Black. What I'm talking about in Black Africa, there was no like spread by the sword. That kind of narrative didn't occur. It didn't occur.
SubhanAllah. So SubhanAllah, very fascinating. By the way, I love this topic. It's something obviously I'm very interested in. Of course, I spend a lot of time in Africa. And I've been very excited for this book for a long time.
Of course, what you're speaking about here is the Islamic ideal.
This is how it should be, but that's not always how it has been. Throughout history, there have been times when, we're speaking about slavery and racism within Islam. Of course, what you're speaking about
among
here,
Muslims.
Pardon? Sorry. Exactly. Amongst Muslims, but not within Islam. That's what I meant to say.
Yeah.
So, what other examples do you speak about in your book?
In terms of negative?
Yeah, about this attack on Islam.
This is, I think, is important when you, not just as a historian, but as Muslims. You see what I'm saying? When we're looking at historical events, we should be ready to say, yeah, this happened. It's not useful, and this is important, especially for those who are involved in dawah. Sometimes I think those people involved in dawah, they can kind of have like rose-tinted spectacles and then look at things in a romantic kind of way. And that's not always helpful, because why that's not helpful? In terms of dawah, tactically, you have to be very careful with that. Because if someone who maybe has dug a bit deeper in terms of certain historical things, they can catch you off the cuff. And you're really going to be hit for six with that.
Yeah.
So So it's always good and important for Muslims to be aware of things, not just always have this romantic notion. There are instances in history which did occur among Muslims and in Muslim societies, which are totally against the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And totally against.
I found it a lot more effective as well when you're academically honest about it.
Yeah.
Because people respect that you're being honest about the history.
Yeah, definitely. So that's why it's actually important. And there's actually and there's a quote from there I mentioned from a historian called Bernard Fremont, who's written about slavery in the Muslim world, and he does mention a point, and he's he's correct on that observation where he mentions exactly what I just did, that sometimes Muslims have this romantic notion and so forth with regards to slavery and so forth, and he's true on that. But at the same time, which we'll get to, is that people like Fremont also need to be willing to accept is, although that was the case, that there were some very negative instances which occurred in the history of Muslims with regards to, let's say, slavery, for instance. At the same time, the Muslim scholars, the ulama, they were always at the forefront of condemning that. They were always at the forefront of writing upon that, and in some cases, which we'll get to, some people actually even paid with their lives in order to, you see what I'm saying, to speak against it. Yeah.
You recently translated a book by Ibn al-Qayyim regarding some of this.
Ibn al-Jawzi. I wasn't the translator. I wasn't the translator.
Oh, okay.
But it was the same publisher published that book, but I wasn't the translator.
Oh, really?
That was Ibn al-Jawzi's book. Yeah, Ibn al-Jawzi's
book. Okay.
Yeah. on Tanwir al-Ghabash fi Fadl Sudan wal-Ghabash, enlightening the darkness on the virtues of the blacks and the Ethiopians. By Ibn al-Jawzi. I mean, that book again. So you mentioned that now, subhanAllah, and that's a case in point. Is that I got a chapter in the book. Does Islam teach racism? This is a scholar. We have a few scholars in Islamic history who wrote like books with regards to like racism. So I'm saying that's not something, when you think about it, John, in terms of the history of civilizations, that's not something that you actually find. Really. See, so it shows that Muslims were at the forefront of not just of in terms of their in terms of upholding like these noble attributes of justice. So I'm saying justice, equality, and humanity. You see what I'm saying? Like you have a scholar. This was like in the 13th century, writing a book on racism. You see what I'm saying? And not just a book on racism, but talking about the virtues and extolling the virtues of black people.
And even on that topic of slavery, like even the example as I mentioned before about Salman al-Farsi, you know, you had the Arabs who were paying a Jew to free a Persian, you know, so to free a Persian slave, you know, the justice regarding slavery, but also on fulfilling that contract with a Jew, you know, where they could have just said, well, we're not paying you, he's a Muslim, you know, come with us, you know. But,
that's from Islam.
Yeah, subhanAllah, it's so just, and of course this is how these waves of people entered Islam. You know, not by the sword. They could see the justice that Islam brought.
That's how Islam spread. Usually, when people saw the saw the mannerisms of the people, and this is what Allah says: "Udu ila sabili rabbika bil hikmah wa maw'idatil hasana wajadilhum billati hiya ahsan." That's what Allah says. Udu ila sabili rabbika bil hikmah. Call to the way of your Lord with wisdom and good preaching. So this is what has led people to Islam, but it's usually due to, as you alluded to, it's usually due to how people saw how trustworthy the Muslims were in terms of their dealings with the people, and this is what meant and nations became Muslim as a result of that.
I mean, of course, when it comes to history, you know, I always encourage, especially people in the West or white people, to study the history of Christianity, the history of you know, the Britain and things like that. But now, for people from a black origin, how important it is for them to study, you know, how can you study black history without studying Islam? You know, the history of how Islam in Africa, regarding the different tribes, slavery, all these things.
I mean, exactly. This is what I also know in the book, is that the more serious historians who were Pan-African, they were very positive about Islam. So people like, whether that was people like Frantz Fanon, Sheikh Anta Diop, or Edward Blyden, or Ivan van Sertima, or Kwame Nkrumah, or Walter Rodney. These Pan-Africanists, writers, that they didn't reach the same conclusions as some of the anti-Islam, right? So there's you know what I'm saying? So it shows that there's a gap somewhere there. You see what I'm saying? In fact, they didn't regard. Walter Rodney wrote a book about how Europe underdeveloped Africa, and he didn't mention that Islam had anything to do with that. You see what I'm saying? On the contrary, it's well known, for example, the civilizations which were in the literature and the libraries of Timbuktu, which were renowned among the nations. You see what I'm saying? It does show that, as we would noted, that there were some like instances which happened in Islamic history which we kind of have to say, that occurred, and that wasn't correct. It wasn't correct in terms of what Allah says in His book. It wasn't correct with what the Prophet taught with regards to justice. You see what I'm saying? And these things occurred within history. And the thing is, it's important for, you see what I'm saying, us to bring attention to that. You see what I'm saying? It doesn't mean, and it's just all about establishing, because Muslims, we have to be upholders of justice. You see what I'm saying? So it's following within that very vein that we have to say, this happened, this is not correct. You see what I'm saying?
So what other examples do you speak about in the book?
So there were some instances which we could say were quite contrary to the teachings of Islam. Well, and as I said, it's important for us to sort of take, as Muslims, to take ownership of that. These things happen. It wasn't from Islam. Muslims did it, but nothing to do with Islam.
Yeah.
And this is an interesting point, because whereas in transatlantic slavery and slavery which occurred, whether that was instigated by the Portuguese or the French or the British,
with the blessing of the Catholic Scotland and Protestant Scotland,
you don't find anyone coming with a book.
Yeah.
So I'm saying, don't find anyone coming with the Quran or the Sunnah saying, "Yep, and here's this. We're gonna enslave you now." You don't, because in fact the contrary was done, because people wanted to circumvent what Islam had put in place, and this is what we found. So there were a few instances in history, whether that was the Basra, what's known as the Zanj slave revolt, which occurred, I think, in like the 9th century. I mentioned that in the book as well. And some historians say that after that occurred, that then led to that was during the time of the Abbasid Empire, and then after that was kind of regarded that form of slavery shouldn't really be done. And then there was the cases of Ottoman Empire. Ottoman Empire is important, is interesting actually, because the slavery which occurred in the Ottoman Empire wasn't based upon race. I mean, as you're probably aware, the Ottoman Empire had a lot of slaves who were Circassian, so they were white Europeans slaves.
Some of these slaves actually took leadership of armies.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, they did.
They kind of worked them.
Yeah, whether they were the Circassian ones or the ones or the African ones. So what was found in the Ottoman Empire was the wicked and disgusting, horrific act of castration of a boy, where they would enslave these boys, whether they were the white Circassian slaves or the black slaves who were largely from Congo and East Africa, but largely from Congo. Most of the resource of slaves who were taken from East Africa, largely from the hinterland, Congo, which we'll get to that when we talk about Zanzibar, and then the horrific castration operations which were conducted. These are horrific. These mutilation which take place totally against Islam, totally against what was taught by Allah and His Messenger. Totally in complete contravention of any kind of humanity or dignity. What's interesting is that during the Ottoman Empire, certain Ottoman scholars issued what are known as firmans, which are decrees or like legal edicts forbidding this practice. So then what was done is that in order to circumvent this, is that Egypt at the time, which was being run by in the 19th century, which had been run by Egypt at the time was a vassal state of the Ottomans, and that was being headed by Muhammad Ali Pasha, who himself was Albanian origin, and he was also the one who also fought against the first Saudi state, and then he later fought against the Ottoman Empire, and then he wanted to get control of Egypt for himself. But all of this happened, like the castration took place during his time, and traders in Egypt at that time, to circumvent that, because it was outlawed in the Ottoman realm, castration, it occurred in parts of Egypt, and it wasn't Muslims who were doing these horrific, gruesome, deadly castration operations. It was actually Christians. Christian monks were doing them. And in fact, some of the revenue which these monasteries, in order to survive, they're getting their revenue from performing these horrific, gruesome castration operations. This is something which is not known about by many. These weren't conducted by Muslims. It was conducted by Christians.
Kind of a double-edged sword.
Yeah, because there was a demand for it as well. Because there was a demand, they would then get these individuals sent off to the Ottoman Empire. So this is something which was totally, again, as I mentioned that in the book, so from an Islamic point of view, totally haram, totally forbidden. It's, I'm saying that such a mutilation, gruesome mutilation should occur upon a human being. This is what was found. This is what we find.
But of course, these academics know that. They know that you can't judge Islam by the Muslims unless they're actually following what Islam teaches. But as you said, the intention behind it it's a polemical intention to pull people away from Islam,
Definitely.
try to discourage them from accepting Islam.
Definitely.
Of course, in America, Islam was picking up. You know, of course, not Islam, but like the Nation of Islam, for instance, and things like this had a big impact on many of the black community coming into Islam. So they're trying to, stop that.
Yeah, but by referral to these examples. And there's also the case in Zanzibar, Zanzibar history as well. Interesting in the Zanzibar case was that slavery there was being controlled and run for the benefit of the Omani state at the time, which was a Ibadi Khariji state, which is probably why you won't find much kind of condemnation. Couldn't find much condemnation among that tradition against it. Maybe, I'm not sure why, it has something to do with their distorted credo. Maybe he's informing that. But again, that's something we have to say, in that case, there needs to be looked at as well.
And of course, the mainstream bodies of Islam have refuted that whole religion,
definitely,
or sect,
definitely. Which is probably why, in terms of couldn't find anything, kind of any really discussion from in that tradition, which is interesting considering how much of their that state at the time was kind of. In fact, the Omani capital was actually Zanzibar at one particular point, and there was a lot of resources there. That was ivory, cloves, and slaves were the main kind of commodities which their state was based upon. There were also the individuals there, again, totally kind of all based upon greed and avarice and chicanery, nothing to do with Islam. People like Tipu Tip, who used to conduct slave raids into he was like an African Swahili, African and Arab or African and Omani slave trader, who used to operate in sort of the East African coast, and go into the hinterland, Congo and so forth.
How about like in Morocco? They also had.
There's a couple of instances in Morocco. There's Moroccan history as well.
I heard they came to Ireland and took some of my people.
If we deal with that, that's the Barbary trade. It was under the Barbary piracy. There was a lot of piracy in the 16th, 17th century along the Barbary coast, which is kind of like northern Algerian and sort of southern Mediterranean coastal regions, and then sort of Algeria, northern Algerian coast, Barbary. That's known as like the Barbary coast. And
so they actually came to Ireland.
But those people were corsairs, John. They were not necessarily people who like doing it like based upon sort of like Islam or anything like that. They're kind of like pirates, or corsairs. Who were kind of they didn't have any sort of sanction from
pirates
any kind
of the Mediterranean.
Something like that. So there's piracy. There's some interesting stories. There's a good book actually, which I referred to in my book by Robert C. Davis. He's got a book called Christian Slaves, Muslim Masters. And he talks about this whole
This is why you get like people with red hair in like Algeria, in Syria. So it comes from
possibly. That's one interpretation as well. That's true. I mean, because there were so many actually English. There are a lot of English people. They were referred to at that time as being renegades because some of them actually they were pirates and then they became Muslim. Okay. And then they went kind of. Some of them like just ended up living in Algeria or Morocco. And they didn't return. Maybe they were from Scotland, Ireland, England. That's found. It's mentioned by Robert C. Davison's book. These people were sometimes referred to as being renegades at that particular time, because they sort of they seemed like they turned back. But there's sort of slave raiding at that time, and I actually remember, and not too long ago, I actually did a discussion with a Christian academic called Anthony McRoy, and it was about that he was arguing that there should be reparations for Britain from Morocco and Algeria for Barbary slavery and so forth. And that narrative, however, that was something which wasn't from the Christian evangelicals. Actually, I think they got that from some of the white supremacists in this country. I'm thinking in America. That's what that's what they call for. That there be reparations for that kind of slavery, which occurred. But that was something, as I said, that wasn't like a state measure. They were corsairs and pirates. It wasn't something where they were getting any kind of sort of state sanction for any of that. You see what I'm saying? It was galley slavery. They would get people like working in the galleys of ships and so forth. Like that. And there were actually accounts of English people who were enslaved and talking about how they were getting whipped by these like basically black Muslim slave masters and so forth.
SubhanAllah. Now, what's the truthfulness of black Muslims in West Africa being a part of the transatlantic slave trade in terms of selling non-Muslims to the Europeans? Is there any truth to this?
No, you couldn't
this
say
is something you kind of hear this a lot.
No, not really, not in that sense. What you have to understand is that, I mean, you could kind of say is that slavery at that time, in terms of really looking at it, something which I've thought about a lot, looking from the perspective of the certain tribes in West Africa, you could say that they were probably naive as to, because obviously slavery existed in their societies, but slavery in their society wasn't anything which would later transpire, for example, in the transatlantic system. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Where the transatlantic system led to it was completely inhumane, completely unjust, daily dehumanization, daily humiliation, complete oppression. You see what I'm saying? Then leading to stratification of people. You see what I'm saying? Based upon skin color and so forth. In terms of how it transpired, you could say there was naivety probably on the part of those tribes. Not just that, but it's also like you could say like and a clear example of could say kind of like a kind of black on black kind of like crime of its day. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It wasn't necessarily based upon that. They didn't necessarily have, because there were Muslims who were taken as slaves. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
This is something which has been discussed by Sylvian Diouf in her excellent book called Servants of Allah, where she mentions about the African Muslims who were enslaved in the Americas. Like for example, I think in Jamaica there's a famous story of someone called Abdul Rahman who was actually a scholar, had knowledge, and he actually wrote in Arabic. I think he even wrote, I'm not sure he wrote a Mus'haf himself, but definitely wrote about, he used to write in Arabic. I think he was actually freed. I think he was actually freed because of his literacy. I think he was actually free. He was one of the fortunate ones who was actually freed on account of his literacy.
SubhanAllah, it's not quite the savage that you meant, that you led to believe,
Exactly.
That these people like savages, they eat people and, they dress like you said about the book cover before. There were scholars amongst them.
Definitely, I think, and this is
they had universities.
This is something which is not really appreciated, John. You could say among, as you mentioned, it's not really appreciated due to certain, you could say among certain, as you mentioned, European historians or academics, due to their ignorance, really. You could say while they are...
Do you think it's ignorance, or they just...
Yeah, definitely it's ignorance. Let's say, for example, someone like David Starkey. He's a powerhouse when it comes to English Tudor history. But we wouldn't refer to him when you want to know about African history or Asian history or Middle East history. Wouldn't really know, because he's definitely that's not his fault. He doesn't know anything about that. Evidently, by some of the ridiculous things that he says. Not just him, but others. So I'm saying, so why they're good with it, for example, within maybe their own restricted field, I can't speak about that because that's not their. I don't know anything really in terms of their knowledge would be limited with regards to that field. So it could be, so it is, John. Actually, I would say that no, it is ignorance because they don't have, because there's something which they have no interest. They have no interest really. They wouldn't have any interest in researching.
But I mean, a lot more recently, of course. I mean, there seems to be more research. I mean, on the empire, like in Mansa Musa and Osman Dan Fodio and these kind of Islamic empires, if you could call them that. How would you say an Islamic empire within Africa?
Yeah,
or,
the West African, because the West African Muslim empires, definitely. Whether that was ancient Ghana, ancient Mali, Songhai. You see what I'm saying? These are then obviously later on, then you would have like Borno, and then the Sokoto, the history of the Sokoto Caliphate, Ottoman Empire and the Sokoto Caliphate. These are all important sort of empires to study. But going back to that, so they weren't based upon. It wasn't like the Muslims having a role alone. There were
and the Muslims are victims.
Many of the tribes in West Africa at that time would have been involved in that. You see what I'm saying? And it was. But that was the tribe I'm originally from, Ashanti. They were involved in that.
And it's Christian. Well, now it's Christian.
And then other tribes would have been involved in that. Whether that was a Mande, Mandinka, Wolof, Hausa, Igbo,
Fulani.
Yoruba, Fulani. You see what I'm saying? All of the tribes. That's why in the Americas and the African diaspora, you find that you find people still speak aspects of all of these different languages. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Even in Jamaica, they have the Maroon community in Jamaica, and some of the Maroons they still speak to this day parts of Twi, Ghanaian Twi. You see what I'm saying? Which is what Ashanti speak. See what I'm saying? So it's amazing. They still preserve parts of that of the linguistic heritage, which is also amazing.
It's interesting. Even in some of the black culture in the Americas, they still preserve some of the shirk of the Africans. You know the old
they do. Yeah,
different things that they
here in Brazil. I think that they're very closely linked to the Yoruba.
And it definitely came from it's the same,
so that's evident.
It's fascinating history and.
So Morocco, going back to Morocco, there was also a case this is actually interesting. There was a case in this will lead on to the other issue. We're talking about abolition and so forth, but there was an incident in the 17th century in Morocco. Where one of the rulers of the Saadi dynasty, his name was Moulay Ismail, he had a program of enforced transcription of black Moroccans into the military. And this was something which was seen as unjust at the time. And many scholars at the time, Morocco, spoke about this. There are many Moroccan scholars, the Moroccan ulama at the time, condemned this kind of a lot of this kind of racism and oppression which was taking place at that particular time. And as I mentioned before, some of them paid with their lives. There was a scholar named Ibn Jassus, who was from Fez, who condemned this. Other scholars like Al-Jarimi from Morocco condemned this. Al-Nasiri.
It sounds very similar.
So many scholars, you see what I'm saying, these were people who were bringing a book saying, what's going on here? This is totally unjust against Islam. It's against what Islam teaches. It's against all of this against the spirit of Islam, and against what the justice which the Quran emphasizes. You see what I'm saying? Because Allah says, "Tilka al-umam qad khalat, laha ma kasabat wa lakum ma kasabtum." Those nations have gone by. Unto them is what they have earned, and unto you is what you have earned. Because what's difficult is because Allah says also, "La taziru wazratun wizra ukhra." One cannot bear the sin of what someone else has bore. And what's important is that sometimes when people try to say, "Oh, but Muslims did this in the past," or "this country did this in the past," the problem is when you're looking at that, and I mentioned it in my book as well, is that certain things which happened, most of the Muslim countries, they only kind of really trace their modern history to the last 50 or 100 years. You see what I'm saying? It's like when colonialism came in, it's like that led to like a kind of, you could say like a break with like their past history, and then anything. It's like some countries actually even really trace their kind of modern history to post-colonialism. You see what I'm saying? So you can't expect them to kind of compress. Like I know people don't even know about some of these historical things which occurred, even though it's from their own countries. Yeah. Why? So there's ignorance, but not just that. I think it's because they're seen as they can't relate to those kind of empires. You see what I'm saying? Because it was a kind of, those empires were kind of established pre-colonialism, and they don't really have much of a connection with them. You see what I'm saying? It's quite complicated. And not just that, as I said, some countries have only been established as countries for the last 60 years. Really, you see what I'm saying? You can't compare them to like a country like a European country, which has its economy was actually largely based upon that in the first place. You see what I'm saying? Which is like what's happened in the case of Britain and so forth, which had an empire, a colonial empire, and so forth. Which you could say both the Industrial Revolution and its own modern history were largely based upon what it's reaped from. You see what I'm saying? Slavery, colonialism, Indian subcontinent, and so forth. You see what I'm saying? So mashallah, John, you went. You did a lot of work in. You went to New Zealand. after the horrific terrorist attack there. But John, okay, what do you understand was the narrative of that particular terrorist?
Again, his idea, as far as I'm aware, was he didn't like the progression of Islam, right? What do you know about that?
Well, because from what I understood, he also wrote some kind of
manifesto,
sort of dodgy manifesto.
He was from
Australia, actually. It was. From what I understand, his narrative, he was decrying population growth was the one thing. That's an interesting topic, population growth, because I don't see anybody having any qualms with white people reproducing. That's a separate topic whatsoever. Can't blame Muslims for that. Surely then, what people like who have that narrative, they need to have their own reproduction ethic, rather than decrying Muslim population growth. You see what I'm saying? That's just complete folly. And this is something which you find in that kind of narrative. Some of these white supremacist narratives is that they decry Muslim population growth. It's something I've seen a lot in their writings. But no one's stopping. I don't see any Muslims stopping anyone from also reproducing and sort of having loads of kids and stuff. They can also do that. So they shouldn't decry Muslims or other people for not having that as an ethos. So I saw that in his narrative, which is something which is interesting. What is even more worrying, John, is that how some aspects of that narrative have actually become pervasive in Western society, especially among certain Western commentators who have actually fed into that narrative. You see what I'm saying? Let's take, for example, Anders Behring Breivik, who massacred 73 young people in Norway. Norway, wasn't it?
Norway, yeah.
Breivik, in his quasi manifesto, which I understand was poorly written in any case, he actually refers to certain commentators who are well-known writers in the UK. He refers to people like Melanie Phillips and her Londonistan thesis. See what I'm saying? He refers to her in his book. That book as well is a risible book, and in any case, it talks about like a kind of it frames as kind of like Muslim kind of conspiracy to effectively sort of take over London, complete balmy, work in any case. But let's look at some of the things what she argues in her book. She argues, for example, she refers a lot to, and this is it's kind of like a kind of, you could say, kind of Machiavellian pragmatic survival technique. It's like she kind of feels threatened by the Muslim presence in the UK, and that's why she sort of she saves a lot of her venom for the Muslim community at the time. For example, in that particular book, you see what I'm saying? Oh, the Muslims, they're asking for a shopping list of demands. I think she says like in the book. That's complete nonsense. But not just that, is that she evokes notions of a shared Judeo-Christian heritage. You know what I'm saying? This notion of a Judeo-Christian heritage, this is something which is like a fabricated term, you see what I'm saying, which was invented like in the 1950s or something like that, which I think is mentioned even by one writer. He wrote actually a book called The Myth of the Judeo-Christian Civilization or something along those lines, you see what I'm saying? Because in Europe, even 60 years ago, they didn't want Judeo appended to their Christianity whatsoever. You see what I'm saying? So this notion is something which some historians have said is actually a fabricated notion. You see what I'm saying? And that actually there's some validity. I know what it's meant by it, but in terms of it being a popular term among Christians, no, that would be accurate. You see what I'm saying? Especially after centuries of pogroms and centuries of oppression. And linked onto that is the notion of the kind of the Vimitude conspiracy theory, if you're not sure if you're aware of that, which is like this was framed by a historian or writer called, it's not actually a professional historian actually, or a commentator called Batior Giselle Littman. She wrote a book called Vimitude, and she talks about how Muslims, they just want to keep Jewish and Christian communities subjugated. And that narrative, why it's dangerous, John, is that narrative has fed into, slowly and slowly along the years, fed into the white supremacist narrative, which is interesting because both Lippmann, Batyor, and Melanie Phillips are both Jewish. And they're slowly, and there are other Jewish commentators as well, they're feeding into this narrative, you see what I'm saying? What's the reality of that? The reality of that, though, now is where has this narrative led to? We've seen it's led to terrorists like Breivik. It's also led to, where's it led to now? Are the white supremacist narrative, white supremacists now, they're talking about we've got a shared Judeo-Christian heritage? No, they're talking about the Jews will not replace us, as they were saying in Charlottesville. So what's happened to this? What's happened to this notion of a shared Judeo-Christian heritage? You see what I'm saying? That's going totally out the window. The same people who they're trying to sort of pander to in their writings, this is where it's leading to. As the Arabs saying, a famous saying, that in qalb as-sihr ala-sahir, the magic has overcome the magician. That's what's happened here. Is that they're feeding into a lot of that narrative, and then narrative then is going kind of back on them. You see what I'm saying? Let's look at in English history as well. The Jewish communities were kicked out of England by the famous 1290 edict. Kicked out of England. So I'm saying booted out, everything banished from England. What's interesting as well, John, is when the Jewish communities were being oppressed and subjugated and ill-treated in these ways, where were they going? Who was accepting them with open arms?
The Muslim world.
The Muslim realm, the Muslim world. And this is something which, unfortunately, some of these, like some of these writers are mentioned, like in the case of like Melanie Phillips and Batyor, something which they're in total historical denial upon. Maybe they're not. I mean, they're not professional historians in any case. That may account for some of it, but it's something which is quite a disservice. You see what I'm saying, to Islamic civilization and the Muslims, for them to kind of deny all of that. And in England, it was only Oliver Cromwell in the 17th century who allowed the Jews to come back in what is known as the Cromwellian Protectorate.
And that wasn't just through England; it's the whole of Europe.
And some people say, well, that was for maybe maybe for cynical trade and commerce reasons.
When he allowed them in,
as opposed to any notions of them having a shared Judeo-Christian
One of them was
heritage.
Because the Jews were allowed to do riba for the Gentiles, right? So I think they allowed them into to loan money and things like that to make access.
That was Oliver Cromwell in the 17th century who allowed for Jewish communities to settle back into England after over about 400 years of being banished from England. See what I'm saying? And it was the Muslims who.
And where did they go?
The Muslim world, whether that was the Ottoman Empire or Morocco, or other parts of the Muslim world. But there seems to be people of the book.
Well, not just because it was like they was not welcome in France, Spain. They were kind of driven out of the whole of Europe, right?
And Portugal as well. So this is why sometimes some of the these historical notions are not really. This is why sometimes it's rather patronising for certain European commentators to kind of like have this sanctimony with regards to the Muslim world. You see what I'm saying? Because totally unbeknown to them, some of these historical details. You see what I'm saying? Where was the tolerance then? Where's the humanity then? You see what I'm saying? For centuries. So it's the same with like the whole issue of abolition of slavery as well. You see what I'm saying? Oh well, we were the ones who abolished it. But that's a bit cynical. Abolished it, that was only due to. I mean, the people who led the abolition, they were people who were kind of marginalised in society anyway. Like William Wilberforce and so forth, but not just that, or Equiano, but not just that. Is that it was kind of cynical because after you've reaped most of the rewards from it. And then after that, then turn around. So you made as much money as you can off it, and then after that, we're going to stop it now. And then you got to stop it too.
Did you see?
It's a bit kind of cynical.
Did you see the recent BBC documentary about the British slave owners? And you know when they paid, they reimbursed.
I think that's still going on to this day, isn't it? The reimbursement.
Well, I think it was only paid off like a few years ago or something, but. They were basically, they were paying the slave owners to basically free the slaves, and but you had to claim for your slave, so you had to fill out a form, and then they'll give it a price basically, and the government kind of decided, British government decided how much per slave, etc. And on some of these records, you've got some of these, the people that were trying to abolish slavery. In the records, they put claims in for their own slaves. They're they're supporting the ending of slavery, but at the same time, they're claiming of the government for their slaves. They're still benefiting. So yeah, I mean, this is also a repeat of history of what we're seeing today. I mean, even recently, you were just telling me about the historian who was firing shots at the black community.
Yeah, there's that historian who made some statements recently. Yeah, the one I mentioned earlier, David Starkey, who, when it comes to English Tudor history, the powerhouse. I wouldn't refer to him on anything to do with either contemporary issues or anything to do with African, Asian, or Middle Eastern history. But obviously, evidently, doesn't know anything about those matters. And I think it's like it's kind of like a fallacy. It's fallacious to refer to someone like that for like contemporary, like what I'm saying, contemporary commentary on either sensitive contemporary issues. You know what I'm saying? Because evidently, that's not his fault. He might know something with regards to Tudor history. I want to know about English Tudor history and Henry VIII. I might want to hear what he has to say on that. I'm not going to refer to him.
But what are some of the comments?
I'm not going to refer to him, like, for example, when it comes to like a contemporary issue.
What were some of the statements he
I mean, in the past, there was a famous thing he said after the riots, where he said something along the lines, "Oh, the chavs have become black. The whites have become black, and they've adopted this culture which is intruded upon us, which is completely wholly false." And even in that, you see what I'm saying? Well, he made another statement recently where, there's so many damn blacks. Slavery wasn't genocide because there's so many damn blacks. There's so many damn blacks in Africa and Britain, aren't there? And an awful lot of them survived. All right, so slavery. Okay, you could say slavery is slave trade by definition. Yeah, it's not genocide, but if it doesn't have the main aim of wiping out that genus of people off the face of the map. You see what I'm saying? So in that sense,
technical
slavery is right. However, the problem with transatlantic slavery is that there was an aspect of it which was completely dehumanizing. You see what I'm saying? There was something in transatlantic slavery known as the slave codes, which gave a white man permission to spit in the face of a black man. You see what I'm saying? These kind of things. You see what I'm saying? Then we had Jim Crow, and you see what I'm saying? And then after that, slaves, they were just given 40 acres and a mule. So there was some really dehumanizing aspects with regards to the transatlantic slave trade. You see what I'm saying? Then I haven't even discussed about the Middle Passage. You see what I'm saying? Kids thrown overboard. You see what I'm saying? If they were sick or even if they were deemed as recalcitrant. This is horrific. This kind of sort of shows that there was no kind of, you know what I'm saying, no kind of morals, no kind of ethics with regards to that. You see what I'm saying? Anyone who did try to speak at the time with regards to that human rights at the time were kind of ostracized, sort of marginalized. You see what I'm saying? And that's what sort of shows that particular brand of slavery, there was a kind of wholesale inhumane aspect to it. I'm not denying that things like that didn't happen in the Muslim world. It did, however, in the Muslim world, there were always, alhamdulillah, all praises due to Allah, that there were like the scholars who would like to check there, who would always speak out against it. We have this, and I have proven this in the records, in the historical record, and in the academic record from the literature, which I refer to in my book. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So then you have but what I've noticed with some of these commentators, John, they're kind of like and some of these commentators, if you notice, some of the ones who are really vociferous when speaking about Islam, really volatile in some of their comments about Islam. What you notice with some of them is that some of them are actually homosexuals. You see what I'm saying? And they're kind of representative of a phenomenon. There was a leftist gay academic who coined a term, what he referred to as the homocons, which are like these right-wing gay conservatives. You see what I'm saying? And there's even one in America called Deplorable Pride, and they actually, the leader of which I think even advocated for the murder of Muslims. Even this is really concerning. You see what I'm saying? And then linking back to the narrative of the Christchurch terrorist, he was influenced by the narrative which is known as the Great Replacement narrative. You see what I'm saying? With this Great Replacement narrative, this was coined and devised by another French homosexual writer called Rene Camus, who discussed how he claimed that France was being overtaken. There was a replacement of the white French. You see what I'm saying? By interestingly, in France's case, though, interestingly, there's a lot of anti-Semitism actually also in France. France has actually been home to a lot of these kind of narratives. You see what I'm saying? People would be quite surprised, but there was actually a lot of influential French people who were actually either supportive of Nazi Germany, and a lot of this hardcore anti-Semitism comes from France. You see what I'm saying? There are other like writers like Boulainvilliers who also discussed about notions of like the French. That there's two types of French. There's like the Gaul, the French who originate from the Gauls and the Romans, and there was the French who were like the Germanic. I like French. You know what I'm saying? So France always had these kind of like oddball racist. Right, do you see what I'm saying? But Camus, he's the one who actually devised this great replacement theory, that the white French, indigenous white French, they're being replaced by black Africans and Arabs and basically Muslims. You see what I'm saying? Another homosexual writer, another sort of homocon. What it seems to me like these writers is similar to what we said before with regards to like the Christchurch terrorist, is that it's odd that they're writing about a great replacement when they themselves indulge in that which is not exactly going to lead to reproduction. Yeah. That's a bit odd. That's the first thing. The second thing is like how it seems to me is that they target. They seem to.
If you really want to counter it, you kind of need to change your.
Not just that, but they're targeting communities who it seems to me. So I'm saying they're quite. One could argue. One could argue that they're very. Let's just say that they regard homosexuality as a sin and an abomination, and it seems that those communities are ones who are particularly targeted by this kind of homocon trend. You see what I'm saying? But however, in doing that, they like also feed in to like this white supremacist narrative. It's actually quite a kind of Machiavellian kind of approach. They like to they put a lot of emphasis upon what the other communities are doing, in order to kind of then slowly lead to acceptance of something which, by and large, many people in the society probably wouldn't accept their lifestyles. However, they want their lifestyles to be more accepted. So, in doing that, then they put a lot of the emphasis upon what these other communities do. It's quite Machiavellian, really, and it's quite like a sort of sleight of hand trick. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Jazakallah khair, bro. SubhanAllah, it's been a fantastic podcast. You know, we learned so much about your research, and I'm really looking forward to getting my hands on one of these. And where can we get this? If someone wants to buy one?
That's available. I think that's available.
Yeah. Amazon
Amazon Dar Salam.
Dar Al-Qam.
Dar Al-Qam.
Al-Qam, yeah. So
Adnan Dar Al-Qam.
Bismillah, make sure you get one of these for your bookshelf and read it. And I think it's a good. Would you recommend this for like people who are interested in? It's more like in defense of Islam, I guess.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Usually, I mean, that book is useful for people who are. Definitely for people who are in maybe different. I mean, it's an interesting historical book anyway. Yeah. But more so for people who are in black communities as well, who want to understand more and like deeper in terms of like what Islam says, because there's a lot of anti-Islamic elements out there. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. And some of the things which I discussed probably come up henceforth. It's been worked out with there. You see what I'm saying? Whether there's issues of Islam actually teaches intrinsically racism, it's intrinsically anti-black, it's intrinsically was spread by the sword, it's intrinsically it's spread by force, it's intrinsically oppressive, all of these issues, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. So it's important, of course, in this current climate as well, but there's going to be a lot of people who are now studying the black history, slavery and things like that, so this would be a good, especially you can't do it justice unless you actually study and learn kind of the Islamic perspective on these, and stuff like that. Yeah.
So obviously, there's some issues which, so I'm saying I'm still learning. So there's still some issues which, would need further future elaboration. And no book is perfect, you see what I'm saying, except for the Book of Allah.
Yeah.
But still, maybe some people might find some benefit in that, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair, bro. And we'd just like to thank sponsors of our podcast today who have allowed us to, mashallah, sit here and use their mashallah
Black Oud London.
Black Oud London. And we're going to put the link below. If you're interested in getting yourself some nice. I don't think I'm allowed to say what this one's called. Subhanallah, this perfume is actually called Second Wife, believe it or not. So I came here to do a
must have, I'm sure.
I came here to
must have. That's a must have, I'm sure.
Subhanallah, I mean, everybody leaves with a spray of the Second Wife, but mashallah, it's actually very nice, mashallah. But yeah, mashallah, make sure you check that out. We're going to put the link below, the details, and you can get your your oud, you can get your nice smell game on, inshallah. So jazakallah khair, bro. It's really inspiring, and I learned a lot from the topic, and especially because this is a topic that really interests me, and we've been trying to do this for a long time. So finally, alhamdulillah. Jazakallah khair. السلام عليكم.
السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.
إنك لا تهدي من أحببت ولكن الله يهدي من يشاء